This is the Team Performance Podcast, where we explore issues at the heart of leadership, team development and organisational culture. I'm your host, Mark Gilroy, and in this series, we're delving into issues around team dynamics, team development and, of course, team performance. Let's welcome today's guest. Welcome to the latest episode in our series of interviews. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Tim Wigham. Tim is a best-selling author, speaker and performance coach. He's currently head of performance at energy transformation business XCEED. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Thanks, Mark. That was a very kind introduction. Probably not sure I deserve that, but I really appreciate it. And I'm so glad to be here.
That was the economical version. I could have gone on for a bit longer. You've done an awful lot of things, and I'm sure we'll get around to talking about them in the show today. I'd love to start, though, with the question of what has been the most memorable team that you've ever encountered?
Well, one could argue that it's a short memory with the team that I'm going to identify here, but I'm going to say that it's the Springbok world champion rugby team of 2019 and 2023. As a proud British South African, if that makes any sense, that would be my short answer, Mark. I've found them to be hugely inspiring and also really interesting to research and scrutinize from a distance because of some of the dynamics within the team. And more importantly, the influence and impact that the team have had on many, not just other South Africans, but rugby followers and others around the world. So, yeah.
That's so interesting. And I was listening to your TED Talk earlier this week, and in that talk, you talk about a different Springbok team and some of the transformation that happened in terms of mood.
Yes. Thank you for watching it, Mark. And you're absolutely spot on. That was the 1995 Rugby World Cup winning Springbok team that, along with Nelson Mandela, were so inspiring at such a critical time in South Africa's history. You know, the new democracy, the leadership that Nelson Mandela showed in supporting a traditionally white sport in South Africa at a time where the new South Africa and the progress since the terrible times of apartheid was still at a fairly fragile stage. So the way that he managed to galvanize the entire country behind that Springbok team was phenomenal. The other thing that I mentioned in the TED Talk alludes to the underdog element, which I always think is such an amazing motivator for any team, almost to the point where I would recommend that even if you're a champion team, you need to find a way to view yourself as the underdog, because psychologically it just has such an important and significant element of push for a team. That Springbok team in 95 had not played much internationally because of the ban on their involvement at the time. And so they went into that tournament, even though they were hosting, they were seeded 9th out of 16 teams. So to go on and to win in the final against the All Blacks, who have traditionally been the benchmark in rugby union, was phenomenal. I've followed rugby closely. It's definitely the number one sport for me. And I find that it is a fantastic metaphor for team work, team effectiveness, team building in general in any environment.
It kind of made me wonder about the analogies back to working teams, because I think there was probably a time where in a really highly effective working team, people had really defined roles and responsibilities and specialisms. And a bit like the rugby team that you just described, where almost anybody could flip into any position in order to be really highly effective and high performing. I wonder if that's kind of something that we've seen come across in a lot of working teams, where generalism and kind of people who are all-rounders, who are able to evolve and adapt to lots of different roles, are actually really typical of teams that tend to succeed.
Yeah, great point. A lot of the research that I've looked at in the recent past identifies goal setting and roles and responsibilities as the most significant elements of a positive team building experience. So what that research says is that the two things that you absolutely have to address in order to make progress at some kind of breakaway or some team building offsite is clarity on vision, mission, direction, the goals for the team, because the sooner you can get alignment on that, the better. And then very importantly, roles and responsibilities, clarity on that. Now, to come back to your question, are people in different work environments more versatile and needing to be able to move with fluidity across maybe more roles than was the case maybe 50 years ago. My gut feel intuition is yes, given the arrival of digital, the pace of change, the pace of technological enhancement and improvement, there probably has been a need to improvise, adapt and progress and become more versatile. And if you then look at, say, the COVID experience, which accelerated our need to work virtually and to make things happen when you're not all necessarily together in the same room or the same place. I would imagine that a survey of a representative sample of different workplaces would say that they've had to become more versatile. But I guess the key point is that even if you're expected to do more, it's important to get alignment and agreement on what those additional scopes of work might be. Because again, the research says that one of the most significant negative aspects for a failing team is a lack of understanding of what my role is and what I'm expected to do for the team. People that are confused and unclear about the expectations on their roles and responsibilities.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I was also really struck by what you said about underdog teams. Could you say a bit more about how you might go about giving a team a sense of being an underdog to bring them together?
Documentaries on the two Springbok campaigns for the 2019 and 2023 Rugby World Cups. The documentary was called Chasing the Sun and Chasing the Sun 2. I'm not sure if you've had an opportunity to watch those. As a South African, I found them just incredibly inspiring and insightful into how Rassie Erasmus in particular, but his entire coaching staff, which was a fantastic group of people, how they were able to light a fire within the Springbok teams that went out onto the park at both of those tournaments. And very much one of the skills that Jacques Nienaber and Rassie Erasmus had is the ability to make the team feel like the underdog and that they are cornered and that they have to group together to face the threat together and to do whatever it takes to surmount the challenge and deliver the goods to get the job done. So the way they seemed to do that, Mark, was by finding some statistics from before when this team had played against the team that they were now going to play again, showing that either they were written off in the past or they were beaten in the past. Or haven't won at this particular ground, or it might be finding, I noticed in some of the documentaries, they found articles in the media where the Springboks had been down-talked or downplayed or written off, or that their style of play, their approach to the game was boring or, unfair. Whatever it took for those coaches to get inside the heads and hearts of the Springbok players to make them feel that they were not being respected. I think that was the key thing. It was finding a way, and I guess it was finding the necessary data to support what they were saying. But whatever it seems to take to make the team feel that they are the underdog and that they're not respected and that they have to go out and have a point to prove. Because if you think about it, at a World Cup for any sport, you probably find that there's not a huge amount of difference between players from many different countries and teams, whether we're talking rugby, football, or other sports. So the margins are so fine when you talk about, the speed of the players, the fitness of the players, their technical ability, even their track records. So where do you get the differentiation? Where do you separate? Well, it's largely in mindset and mood set. And indeed methodology. But if you can get into the hearts and minds of the players and make them feel that they have a point to prove and that they're, very importantly, this is a very important point for any team, purpose and meaning. If you're doing this for more than just your team or your squad, if you're doing it for an entire nation, which, again, the coaches of the Springbok squad did so well. And then Khaleesi as captain has just been phenomenal in being a genuine, authentic leader who has always, without fail, said that it was the people of South Africa that have inspired the team. And the team very much feels connected to the entire country, and that they feel that they have a responsibility to every South African everywhere to do whatever it takes to get the job done and to make their country proud of them. So I think that, that purpose, that meaning ties into the need to make the players feel like they're either underdogs or that they are under threat or that they are being disrespected. If that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. Wow. So there's a lot there, but I was hearing a lot there about identity and chaining the team's identity to a much wider identity, like a national identity in this case. That would definitely light a fire under a lot of teams that I can think of.
Identity is such a great point, critical for any team, and lots of research on that as well. Certainly something in the work that I've been doing for the last nearly 20 years as a performance guide in the upstream energy sector, working with teams, rig teams, upstream teams, frontline teams, has been to establish an identity early on. And we've got quite a fun way of doing that, Mark. We will challenge the members on the team, all of them, to come up with a suggested name. And if they're a budding artist, they can also come up with a suggested logo or design to represent the team. And then the leadership group that can be pre-selected, after everyone's had an opportunity to contribute, we'll have a look at all the entrants and all of the submissions and select the best, and then we'll work with a designer to come up with a logo and a name that represents the region, the culture, the language, wherever it might be that we're working, because it's not always UK. In fact, it's often not the UK. It could be Africa, Southeast Asia, or elsewhere. So respecting the region and respecting context and local culture in terms of the name and the logo, it really helps for that team to develop a unique identity for that particular project, that campaign, that moment in time, such that even though the members on the project team may come from different companies and organizations and may have different logos themselves, for the purposes of this project, they all come under this new unique identifying brand or emblem, which can be placed on a T-shirt, be placed on a program, presentations, jackets and other gifts that then potentially be shared throughout the campaign. But you're right, identity, so important to establish early on, because if people feel like they're part of a team, then they'll behave like that as well.
It makes me think about, I had a call earlier this week from another practitioner of PCS, and they were asking, well, I've got these two groups of people and I'd like to put them all together as part of an assessment, as part of one of our surveys. And what do you think about that? And I said to them, well, my first question was, do they see themselves as a team? Because if the answer is no, it's going to be a massive waste of everyone's time. We've got to start from that point. If they see themselves as one collective identity and entity, then that's probably a good argument to say, yeah, fine, run it through as one big group. But if they don't view themselves as a team, if they don't feel like they are one enormous team, then really you've got to start there. You've got to start with building identity work. I love that idea of having a logo as well as a name, almost like a coat of arms. Makes me think about having a coat of arms.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of what you just said that's really important and absolutely accurate. So the research that I did recently into the journey or the necessary factors to go from a working group to a real team. 4 of the key success factors to enable that culture, if you like. The first was a shared vision. So a shared vision, mission, challenge. The second was the team itself, getting the right people on the team, selecting the right group of people for this vision, mission, challenge, getting the right people on the bus, if you like, heading in the right direction. The third one was team values. So being very clear about what the values and priorities are for this chosen group of people in order to give them a fighting chance of achieving that mission. And the final one is the team environment, which ties in very, very much to our shared passion, Mark, around culture, climate, creating the right conditions for a team to achieve flow, for a team to flourish, for the chosen group of people to work effectively together. So those 4 elements of vision, composition, values, and environment, they emerged from some extensive research that I did as the most important four components of helping a working group become a successful, real team. So yeah, thanks for prompting that. It's pointless trying to preempt team identity if the group of people that you've assembled don't feel that they're on a mission to achieve something challenging, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And you touched on this earlier on, but I'd love to just get a bit deeper into it. You were talking about the distinctions around mindset and mood set, which is the title of your book. In simple terms, how would you describe the differences between those two ways of looking at psychology of a team?
Yeah, in simple terms, I would say that mindset is the mind, whereas mood set is more the heart, the head and the heart. Another way of looking at it, I would suggest, is that mindset comes from leadership. If you talk about a team mindset, if you like, and if we say refer back to the Springboks, for example, I would say that the mindset is set by the leadership group, the coaches, the captain, vice captain, and the senior players. Mood set, I would say, is more of an environment and a team element. So mood set is the atmosphere, the heart and soul of the team, psychological safety, or that sense that it's safe for me to say what I think and there isn't going to be reprisal or recrimination unless I am disrespectful, in which case that will align with kind of a team charter or team values in terms of what the boundaries are for what you can and can't say or do. So, yeah, I think the simple distinction is that mood set is about setting the mood. It's about maintaining the right level of emotion or the right emotion at the right time and an atmosphere or environment most conducive for the team to be in flow most of the time, delivering their best work. Whereas mindset is slightly more clinical, perhaps. It's strategic. It's strategic, and it requires the leadership group to be clear about the vision, mission, goals, tactics. Whereas mood set is about understanding the mood of the group and getting that mood to the right level for the right task.
Yeah, I love that distinction, and it makes me wonder about why there are so many books and articles written around mindset. And so often the idea of the mood of a team, it sets the context for everything, is relatively ignored.
Yeah, 100%. You've teed me up there 100%. And I touch on this in my TED talk. As you know, mindset has been researched and discussed extensively, whereas understanding emotion and the influence of the right mood for a team and the right climate and the right atmosphere for a team to flourish, I have found more difficult to identify within the literature or even in terms of common conversation, common understanding in most team environments, particularly with leaders not really understanding the significance of their behavior on the emotion of their teams. That's probably, I believe there's a significant gap. And because you and I, Mark, and many others are passionate about this stuff, I became curious. About why that is, where the gaps are, what research might have already been done. One of the simple studies that I found was one which included Oxford amongst other universities, where they had studied the impact of happiness on productivity. And I touch on that in my TED talk. And admittedly, it was only in certain call centers or a set environment for that particular study. But it found, without question, that happier workers were more productive by a factor of about 20%. And so I'd be very surprised if similar findings didn't apply to different environments. And I'd also be surprised if it wasn't way more than 20% in certain other environments. And I kind of make the point in the TED talk that it's kind of a no-brainer because it's literally not about the brain. It's about the heart. It's about the gut, it's about how we feel, it's about emotion. And if leaders using their brain can see the statistic that happier workers are more productive workers, surely we should learn how to enhance the mood of our teams such that they are happier and therefore more productive. Win-win for everyone.
Yeah.
So I just found it incredible that, based on my experience, certainly in the energy sector, there was insufficient leadership mentoring to help young leaders and not so young leaders to understand the impact of their behavior on the mood of their teams, and therefore raise awareness of that, which I try to do with the TED Talk and I do through my facilitation work. Try and raise awareness of that so that we can help leaders lead more productive teams.
Yeah, I love that. I made a post recently where I brought in the analogy of a chefing team, a team restaurant, because a lot of the most memorable teams I've ever worked with were working in the service industry, in kitchens. Just incredible seeing these kind of high pressure environments, incredibly well orchestrated by a fantastic leader. And yet, if you are thinking about a team like that and they're all working together to, I don't know, bake a cake, for example, you could be using the best ingredients and you could be working with the most talented chefs in the world with the right mindset. But if the oven is set at the wrong temperature, that cake is not going to rise. Whatever you do, it's about the environment that you've created for that to happen. And in some cases, you and I will have come across teams like this where you have leaders who are walking around adjusting the temperature of that oven without really knowing what they're doing and having massive unintended consequences to the performance of that team and all of their outputs and all the things that people really care about measuring. It is about the leaders' walk and talk.
Yeah, it's a great metaphor. And you reminded me there, Mark, of, again, some of the thought that I've put into this and some of the epiphanies that I've had over the years, other metaphors that relate. So one of them is this idea of walking on eggshells. So you see it in a family environment when the parents get home, bad day at work, they haven't taken the time to switch from work manager to parent in the home environment, get home, clearly unhappy looking, frown on their face. Kids pick up on that. Kids are now walking on eggshells thinking, well, I don't want to say anything that might upset mommy or daddy. In fact, I don't necessarily even want to be around them if they're in such a bad mood. And it's trying to help managers realize that if they walk into the office environment or come onto a Teams call or a virtual call with a frown on their face or barking at people, how that just shuts people down. It shuts team members down. So that was the one metaphor, is kind of the home environment and how that can relate to the office environment. The other one, though, when you mentioned the oven, and I was thinking of spaces, again, I touch on this in the TED Talk, is around a car journey. When you're in a car as a family or a group of people, if you can allow everyone to contribute to the music that you're listening to, for example, or the radio station that you're listening to, and indeed, and this is where you prompted me and reminded me, Mark, if you're playing with the air conditioning in the car such that everyone's comfortable, checking that to the degree that you can, you've got the temperature kind of right for the majority of the passengers, if not everyone. So those two things, what you're feeling in terms of your comfort with the temperature and what you're hearing in terms of the music, the radio station, or the conversation. If you've decided to turn the radio off to have a good conversation, keeping the conversation on topics that most people can contribute to. Again, those are such simple, arguably everyday type examples, which might help leaders understand that it's very similar. The everyday job that they have to inspire their teams to deliver their best work, to achieve flow, to be happy, to want to stay where they're working, is a bit like being a good parent in the domestic environment or a good driver in a driving environment. So I really like your reference to restaurants, chefs, kitchens, because I am useless in the kitchen personally. And I am always, it's just so impressed with the amount of work that has to go on behind the scenes in most restaurants when they're busy to keep people happy. I mean, multiple orders from a menu, lots going on, and an expectation that the food's going to be on your table within 10, 15 minutes. And you've got only a finite number of chefs and waitrons behind the scenes who are just making this all happen. And I think that that's an understated or under-respected work environment for genuine team effectiveness. So it's a great example.
I guess there's lots of different layers of it in that environment, aren't there, as well? You've got the kitchen environment, you've got the kind of ovens and what's actually being created in those environments. And then you've got the environment of the front of house and how you can sort of shape and form that. I remember my wife and I went for a dinner recently and the food was wonderful, but the whole place was just really weird. The atmosphere was odd. The mood, the climate in that sense was just almost unsettling. And neither of us could really put our finger on it, but we couldn't get out of there faster.
Interesting.
And I guess when you're running a business like that, you have to control all of those different layers and levels of mood and environment.
Yes. Yeah.
Your parental example there really resonated with me, and it made me think about a team I worked with many years ago where the person who was in charge of the organisation wasn't the most powerful person in the organisation. And actually the most powerful person in that organisation was the HR manager. And that individual carried with them this, I used to refer to it as their emotional wake. Whenever they entered a room, it was like a tidal wave of emotion, usually negative emotion, and it permeated everything. Like you could see people kind of sinking into their seats as they walked in, and they were completely oblivious to it. But because they had this ability to impact the mood and the climate of pretty much every team discussion that happened, they wielded such enormous power in that business. And we had to find a way to unpick and unravel all of that. Because it was really toxic, really toxic. I think people aren't often very conscious of the emotional wake that they leave behind, even after they've left a room.
I love your imagery and your language there. So visual, the wake or the tidal wave or wake that some of these toxic managers and leaders leave behind them. And the saddest thing is that in many cases, these individuals are oblivious to that wake and to the damage that they are leaving behind. Or to come back to my point earlier, that people are walking on eggshells around them just to survive the day or survive the week. I think your reference to the word toxic is also it's a critical one. And I often use the analogy of apples in a barrel. And all it takes is for one bad apple, or one apple to be bad, should I say, for all of the apples to go off. It really it takes one toxic team member to disillusion, dishearten, and disintegrate an entire team. Because there's a great saying that what we tolerate becomes our standard. And team members, if they see a toxic team member being tolerated or exalted or allowed to cause all sorts of collateral damage around the organization, then as you have alluded there, Mark, it becomes, in general, a toxic place to work because everyone's watching their back, everyone's worried, no one wants to put their head above the parapet or be honest or say what's on their mind for fear of reprisal, recrimination, or prevention of progress. So, yeah, you had great imagery there because I think we've all seen it in work environments or other environments where there's an individual that just carries a certain negative mood with them, and that can affect everyone around them. So what do we do about that? I think, like most challenges, awareness is the most important first step. Awareness of the idea of mood set and the idea of how our behavior, attitude, facial expression, and what we say, nonverbals and our verbals, how they affect our communication and therefore our leadership. Because, by the way, leadership and communication are one and the same thing. My research showed that to an incredible extent, more than I expected. Communication is almost a euphemism for leadership and ownership. You know, communication is everything. and it's verbal, but more importantly, it's non-verbal. And I know there are examples of studies where some people say what you say is even less than 10%. I'm not sure I agree with that. But what I do agree with is that the non-verbals are as important, if not slightly more important than the verbals for your communication. So that means that your behavior, the energy that you're giving off, your positivity or negativity, your facial expressions, those are constantly affecting everyone around you, especially if you're a leader or a manager in a work environment. So awareness of that is probably the first thing. Then we have to confront that toxic HR manager in the example you used, or could be a key leader in a work environment. It's having the courage to approach that individual and try and find the right time and the right opportunity to share the concern and to try and help them understand the effect that they are having on those around them. Now, that's not easy. We both know that. It's not easy. It's actually a leadership responsibility. So ideally, a good leader who is curious and observant and available and present would notice that there are individuals within the organization who are having this negative effect. And then it's down to that leader to have the conversation and ultimately decide whether the situation is salvageable, whether the individual is coachable, or whether it's time to agree to part ways. So I think awareness is key in order to make progress. I mean, it's like lots of these, even Alcoholics Anonymous is the one that's often referenced, where it starts by admitting that we have a problem.
Yeah.
Within the team or within ourselves. So, yeah, those come some of the things that I would say on that, Mark. It's a good example that you give. And as you were giving it, I could visualize many examples of it that I've had as well.
How about for the team then, Tim? So thinking about practical examples, if you've come across a team who are struggling with their mood set, with maybe an unhealthy climate, maybe they've just gotten rid of a toxic leader or an influence in their team, and they're looking to help recalibrate their mood set, what sort of practical things might they do?
Great question. I'm a big fan of the offsite. And to be honest, it doesn't have to be any more complicated than a meal and a few beers. I'm a big fan of that. I find that there can be a somewhat negative perception of the term team building. For whatever reason, there's a perception that can involve doing stuff that makes me nervous or I'm not interested in or might show me up to be useless at something, or spending time with people that I don't want to spend time with. Most people, in my experience, are up for a free meal and a few drinks in a nice place. So what practical things can you do? Well, that would be one. It's the whole thing about breaking bread together. Break bread together, have a drink together. That over millennia has proven to be a valuable way for people to connect. So that would be one practical suggestion. More than that, I would suggest that there is value in a change of scenery, because the power of place and the influence that place has on performance and on a sense of purpose and a sense of collaboration is quite remarkable. So sometimes if a team is stuck or coming out of a challenging period where, as you say, maybe a toxic leader or a toxic team member has just left, it's a bit like a reboot or a reset. Maybe go somewhere different, change the scenery, change it up, take some time to reflect on current reality, desired future, and then get some ideas on how we go from here to there. Half a day. Doesn't have to be anywhere grandiose. It might just be somewhere that's a little different from the office environment. And that can help. That can help get a team from one state to a different state, if that makes sense.
It makes total sense. I think changing your physical state has so many other kind of emotional and psychological benefits. It's one of the reasons when I'm coaching, my strong preference in almost all cases is to do it whilst walking or whilst driving for all kinds of reasons, primarily because you haven't got that intensity of staring at somebody in the face and feeling like you need to put on a face for them or be looking the right way or be looking at them or maintaining their gaze. Most great conversations happen whilst you're actually standing alongside somebody.
Yes.
Because their mind can wander, their gaze can wander, and stuff can influence their thinking in ways that just don't happen if you're stuck in a hotel meeting room or a boardroom. I really like that as an idea to change the mood of a team. I was always taught, I never did it in the context of mood as well, but things like the psychology of optimism. One of the best ways that you can elevate someone's levels of optimism, as research has proven, is by giving them a gift that was unexpected. So we used to do that all the time. At workshops that we used to run, we would end the workshop by giving out actually a really nice package of gifts. And it hadn't been advertised at all. And as a result, our feedback sheets were always incredible because everyone's optimism had just kind of gone up about 3 or 4 notches because of this consequence. But I guess that the side effect of taking them out for a meal together, and if it was paid for, yes, you've got that shared experience together, you've got that time together when you're breaking bread, but if it was a gift from the organisation, there's all sorts of lovely messages that conveys. We value you, we value the time that you can invest with each other. There's a lot there that would have a positive impact on mood.
I couldn't agree more. And there's that Christian perspective that it is in giving that we receive. So I really like what you're saying, Mark, because it's a win-win-win for everyone. If the organisers, leaders, team members take the time to get a gift, it shows that they've thought about those that are receiving the gift. They're going to feel better about giving. The team's going to feel good about receiving something. And it doesn't need to be, again, it doesn't need to be something that's expensive or grandiose. It's often the personal touch which helps pull a team together. Take a working group to becoming a real team. It's those subtle touches that make all the difference. So I really like what you said there. And the danger with all these things is if it's not genuine. So to build a genuine team, you need genuine people doing genuine things in simple terms. So a team knows if it's contrived. They know if someone is putting on an act. Even in terms of mood set, you can get someone who understands the theory but is being fake. And again, people pick up on that, don't they? So the idea of setting the mood, it requires a genuine investment from leaders to be kind and to be interested, curious, involved, available. Otherwise, it'll potentially backfire and do more harm than good. Yeah, it's an interesting topic, and I do genuinely feel that the idea of climate, the idea of mood is massively under-respected, understated, underplayed. And when you look at all the best teams in sport, and certainly many of the teams in the industrial or corporate environment, and if we're lucky enough to be able to read a bit about those teams or watch documentaries about them, there's undoubtedly an atmosphere and a sense of togetherness which bonds those people together to help deliver the results that they get. It's unquestionable. Even with some of the tougher coaches of some of these American football teams, rugby teams, and other teams that I've followed documentaries on, there's a kindness within those coaches' toughness, and that's the key. It's managing that balance between significant discipline but also genuine care and concern for the players or the team members involved. So getting that balance is the challenge, isn't it?
Absolutely. Tim, thank you so much. There's so much in that for managers, teams, leaders, and whole businesses to be thinking about when it comes to mood set. If people want to find out a bit more about what you do and some of your interests, how can they get in touch with you?
Thanks, Mark. I've really thoroughly enjoyed this. People can find me on LinkedIn. To be honest, it's probably the easiest place. I'm on LinkedIn, and I would love to connect with anyone who wants to take this conversation further. And of course, I can then share other email and other contact details as needed. But LinkedIn is probably the best place to connect with me, and please do.
Super. I'll make sure I leave a link to those in the show notes along with your TED Talk and the link to your book as well, Mood Set.
Thanks so much, Mark. I really appreciate it. I've really enjoyed the conversation with you, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks for joining us, Tim.
If you enjoyed this episode, please let us know by subscribing and leaving a review on your favourite podcast app. Meanwhile, if you're interested to learn more about how the PCS approach can help you explore leadership, performance and culture within your business, get in touch with our team and we'll be happy to help.